humanity. Keep watching. The politics.
America Open Market, AO Market. The best digital market for humanity is a free multilingual borderless market open to international sellers with various languages included. With America Open Market, you may start selling in minutes after filling out the form. Comprehensive dashboard where you understand your sales, orders, and customers is available. You get paid directly, securely, and instantly on the America Open Market. You can sell your house, car, electronic laptop, CD player, boombox, phone, headphones, furniture, and clothing, and anything on AmericaOpenMarket.com where all your sales and customer needs are met. Register as a merchant today. You will not regret becoming a vendor at America Open Market. For further inquiries, contact us at aomarket@gmail.com. AO Market, best digital marketplace for humanity. Do you know that there is a publishing company that wants to make life easier for you as a writer? This publishing company is called World Inkers Printing and Publishing. We publish in all different languages, and we're looking for writers of all genres, all formats. We're looking for scholars, ghostwriters, playwrights, poets, short fiction, novelists, you name it. We're looking for anybody who is interested in writing and the craft of writing to be in touch with us. You can reach us at info.worldinkers@gmail.com. With World Inkers Printing and Publishing, you do not require a lot of money to publish with us. Contact us today at info.worldinkers@gmail.com. Become a winner with other authors at World Inkers Printing and Publishing. Give us a shot. We will surely convince you. Hello and welcome to the Foreign Policy Review. I'm Dustin Pickering, your host. We have Carlo Parcelli and Billy Bob as co-hosts today, and Jay Tharappel is with us to discuss Europe, the Heart of Darkness. And we also wanted to have a broad discussion of whether or not we should reach out to MAGA Republicans and so forth and those types with our agenda. So let's go ahead and get this kicked off. Let's see what do you guys want to add any comments to the introduction?
Go ahead, Billy Bob.
Yeah, I want to thank Jay. Jay's in Australia, so he's coming in about 2 a.m. his time and waking up. So really appreciate that. Jay is a economic historian and geopolitical analyst, and he's got some terrific opinions, and we were hoping to hear some of them today. We joke that Europe is the heart of darkness. Obviously, they're going through some. They're going to be going through some difficult economic times, and there's some protests. It kind of seems like the establishment is attempting to try and marginalize those working class protests by labeling those protesters as right-wing extremists, racists, anti-immigrants, etc. And to some extent, there's probably a grain of truth to that. But that leads into the general, topic of, as communists, as leftists, not that everybody here identifies as communists, but, as leftists for sure, how should we, approach the idea of working class unity? I mean, how do we reach out to people that are, identify as part of the MAGA crowd, etc., and develop a working class coalition that we can weaponize to pressure the establishment to either fix their policies or step aside and put a working class government in place. So that's a pretty broad topic, but Carlo, you want to give a brief opinion on any of that, or you want to let Jay?
I want to hear from Jay.
Okay.
Right. Okay. The reason I got into this is because I posted something about this very question where I said, look, winter is coming. Europe has essentially antagonized Russia to the point of initially imposing sanctions on Russia. And now it's gotten to the stage where the sanctions have not worked. In fact, they've backfired. Russia's economy is stronger as a consequence of them demanding payment in rubles, in their own currency. And now Russia's in a position to be able to dictate terms to Europe. So Russia's now actually sanctioning Europe and saying, no, we're not going to trade oil with you until you lift the sanctions on us. And so this has been met with widespread opposition across Europe, because many people in Europe are saying that they don't want to starve for this. That they would like to establish normal relations with Russia again. And so recently, what happened is that the Czech Prime Minister Peter Fiala came out and accused the protesters. So there's about 70 to 100,000 people who went out and protested, and accused them of being a Russian fifth column. Even though their reasons for going out and protesting are entirely material. It's because they don't want energy prices to rise by 500, 600, 700%. I mean, that's going to kill a lot of people. I mean, already people die in winter because of cold in that part of Europe. So it's just common sense to me that if the reason why these people are going out and protesting is because of direct material concern about their living standards, then communists should support them. It does not matter what ideology they represent. It really doesn't matter. If they, it depends on, ultimately it comes down to why they're protesting. That's what matters, not their kind of outward ideology.
Carlo?
Well, I see it as a kind of the heart of darkness. Yes, the lights will go out in Europe, but I see it as a kind of Versailles moment for Europe, and that is when I see the protests, and I look into who's supporting the protests. For example, the Czech protests for last week. It's all the right-wing parties in the Czech Republic. And all across Europe, the protests are being sponsored by members of parliament on the far right. Now, in the Czech Republic, the communists did participate, but they have absolutely no influence in the Czech Republic. They're one of the weakest parties and all. Of course, the West, in their propagandistic mode to present the communists as fascist elements, lump them in with the true fascists. I mean, like the Italian parliament. It's but they have that far right fascist group that's now got a. I think they're the number 2 party in Italy at this point. I've got the name down here. Oh, the Brothers of Italy. It sounds like something my father would take me to when I was a kid. And they eat the scrambled eggs in the morning, Knights of Columbus crap. But anyway, I think the problem is that these protests are going to be easily subverted by the people whose main concern, because they're wealthy, whose main concern, the far right, is just dripping with money, is immigration, and that's what they use as a tool to drive the general population toward this xenophobic form of fascism that seems to be had predilection in Europe. I mean, you see it in Ukraine in scores. So that the elements are there, of course, for economic deprivation, but at the same token, that can be exploited the same way that Hitler exploited that kind of deprivation after the Treaty of Versailles. And I see too much of that going on, and I don't see it right now as being. I see it like I do the American MAGA protests. I see them as being geared more toward racism than economics. Now, maybe when the real economics hits, that'll change, and certainly I think that's coming. But right now, the people that can afford to stage these events, and they cost big money, and they have to get people into the streets for things that really haven't happened dramatically yet. I think.
So
I
you
think
think that's a
doesn't
fear,
bode
Jay? I
well.
mean, is that a legitimate concern that you've got big right wing rich backers promoting and getting all the people out on the street? I mean, should that should that affect our perspective and our support of these rallies? I mean, what do
No,
you
I
think?
mean, if like, ultimately it comes down to the underlying reason why they're going out to protest, which I think I would go out and protest if that was what my government was doing. If my government was shipping weapons and money into Ukraine, which is an extremely corrupt government, so a lot of that money is going to be squandered. A lot of corrupt Ukrainian officials are going to be using that money to buy villas in Italy and other places in Europe. Um, and like Zelensky has resorted to reviewing a petition into the legalization of porn in order to raise revenues for the state, despite getting something like $2-3 billion a month or something like that. I think he's been asking for 7 billion from the rest of the world. So first of all, where's that money going? I would be asking that question, especially since I, in that situation, would be asked by the government to essentially freeze and cut my living standards. So that's a working class issue, right? I mean, it does not matter. Like nothing else matters. I'm going to address the question about fascism and immigration because I think that was central to the concerns raised by Carlo. The first question we have to ask is, what is the continuity with fascism? So, if the word fascism has no continuity, then it has no meaning. The original fascism, what was its substance? In a sense, the question I'm asking is, why was the original fascism bad? And I think this is a question that, people have not really asked. Like in the West, we just assume that fascism is bad without asking the question, why is it bad? Um, and so the answers that I've seen really vary. On the one hand, you have people in the West who assume that fascism is bad for aesthetic reasons, because fascism involves the aesthetics of goose stepping, militarism, extreme nationalism. It's just a checklist of criteria. Whereas I say that fascism can be summarized in the words of an American author by the name of Lothrop Stoddard, who wrote a book called "The Rising Tide of Color Against World White Supremacy," and his argument was that Europe should form a united front. All the European countries should join forces together against Bolshevism, against the Soviet Union. And the argument was that the Soviet ideology, which was one of solidarity and anti-racist cooperation and support for national liberation struggles that were fighting to free themselves from European domination, that this ideology emanating from Moscow was an existential threat to the stranglehold of world white supremacy, and therefore there should be a crusade to defeat the Judeo-Bolshevik regime in Moscow. That was the ideology that ultimately culminated in the Axis invasion of the Soviet Union, and that's what that's the invasion that caused so much death, destruction, and suffering. I mean, on both sides of Eurasia. On one side of Eurasia, you have the Italians and the Germans. They're trying to carve out their own systems of national exploitation. The Germans take on the Soviet Union directly. Italy attempts to take on North Africa, and Italy's attempts are, kind of laughable in hindsight. And of course, Japan tries to invade, conquer, and colonize to take on East Asia, because they're all attempting the same thing. On the one hand, they want to defeat the ideological threat and the material threat posed by the Soviet Union, because it's a gigantic, resource-rich continent that has no interest in exploiting the third world, whereas the resource-poor countries of Northern and Western Europe do have an interest in maintaining the relations of exploitation that they do have with the third world. And so Germany takes on Russia. Italy attempts to carve out its own, relations of national exploitation at the expense of North Africa. And Japan attempts to carve out its own relations of national exploitation at the expense of East Asia. So that's, Korea, China, Vietnam, Indonesia. So, that ended up failing because of the resistance of the Eurasian bloc, because China, Russia put up a fight and lost tens of millions of people, defeating this attempt at colonization. That from the perspective of the third world, that is what the Second World War looks like. Okay, it's very different perspective from what you hear about in the West. So that's how I would look at fascism. So if you then ask the question, what's the continuity of that? Well, have a look at NATO. What is NATO? What is the West? What is the US-led alliance? It's an attempt to form an alliance with the former empires of Europe, plus Japan, which is also a former empire, to try and keep the rest of the world poor and subjugated for as long as possible. And they see Russia as an alternative source of security because it provides weapons to countries around the world. So the reason why they can't just go into any African or Asian or Latin American country as easily as they could in the past is because all of these countries have modern equipment, and the vast majority of their arsenal is Soviet or Russian. And the fact that Russia is no longer officially communist doesn't really change the fact that they still continue to play an anti-imperialist role. Not because they're consciously anti-imperialist or because they consciously embody the anti-imperialist ideology of Vladimir Lenin. They certainly don't. Putin hates Lenin. But because they inherit the same geostrategic orientation of the Soviet Union. In that case, they objectively have an interest in being anti-imperialist as far as the Asian, African, and Latin American tricontinent is concerned. That's my argument. And so that's the question about what is the continuity of fascism. The continuity of fascism, as I see it, is this attempt by NATO, the United States, the collective West, including Japan, to aggressively contain, weaken, and impoverish the rest of the world. And they see the Eurasian heartland as the area that needs to be contained the most. As for the question of immigration, look, I'm going to be very blunt here. I think that anti-immigration sentiment is actually compatible. I use my words very carefully. Anti-immigration sentiment is compatible with anti-imperialism. Because where does that sentiment lead? It leads to asking the question, what is the cause of the gigantic immigration wave that we've seen in Europe over the past 10 years? And the answer to that a lot of people in Europe come to is that it's because of the wars in the Middle East. And the response to that is to say that these wars should have never happened, right? And obviously they themselves are in many ways responsible for this, right? I mean the European states. I don't mean specific parties. So, for example, even countries like Croatia and Bosnia and Serbia, the former Yugoslav countries, and a lot of other Eastern European countries, they were selling off a lot of their old, communist era weaponry to countries like Turkey. And then these weapons were then being sent to the Free Syrian Army in the early stages of the Syrian conflict. And so they were fueling the destabilization of Syria. And then after about 5-6 years, the largest contingent of refugees into Europe is actually coming from Syria. It's about 30-40% of the refugees into Europe. So, when the far right then comes to the realization that these policies have caused the destabilization, their response is to say, yeah, we shouldn't be destabilizing these countries, which goes against the continuity of fascism that I spoke about before, which is to try and keep the tricontinent as poor as possible. And that includes the Middle East. So anti-immigration sentiment is compatible with anti-imperialism. That doesn't mean it doesn't get ugly, right? Because I've already predefined what I think the continuity of fascism is. It's the attempt to keep the third world, the tricontinent, poor for as long as possible. So it's not to say that it doesn't get ugly, right? I mean, it does, right? But then again, it's not. I think any nation on Earth. No nation on Earth wants mass immigration. It's just not comfortable. It's just not feasible, right? Like when you have lots and lots of people coming into your country, they don't speak the language. It's going to cause hardships. It's going to increase, to use Marxist language, the reserve army of labor, and that's what they're faced with.
So to kind of summarize, and then Carlo, I'm sure, has some response. But so you're kind of saying that when the far right engages in these policies and promotes these policies of, ending imperialism and kind of ending the exploitation of and the wars in, Syria, Africa, the Middle East, that you can't really condemn them for that. That's not furthering fascism per se, right? It's the opposite.
No, it's the opposite.
It's the opposite.
It's all these liberal regimes that believe it's their duty to go around and intervene on humanitarian grounds in other countries, essentially intervene, destroy countries in the name of saving them. Those are the political forces that inherit the continuity with fascism. They just do it for a different ideology. Fascist ideology was overt. It was a tribalistic kind of justification for warfare, as opposed to a universalistic justification for warfare. The tribalistic justification is we have to go out there and invade, conquer, and subjugate other nations because it's in the interests of our tribe, our nation. Whereas the universalistic and humanitarian justification for warfare is the opposite. It's where you say we have to go out there and invade, conquer other countries because we have to save them from their own governments. We have to save them from the brutal tin pot dictatorships or oriental despotisms that are dominating them and controlling their lives, and because we don't like their attitudes towards gay marriage or something like that. That's the direction that we're heading in with liberal imperialism.
What do you say, Carlo?
Well, look, I agree with most of what Jay said. What I don't get is I thought we were talking about the working class. I don't know about Australian working class, but I know the American working class doesn't know what the fuck you're talking about. They wouldn't have understood 5%, 2% of what you just talked about. It's not relevant to them. The loop for them, and we talked about this before the show, is at least in America. Let's take America now, and I think it applies to Europe to a strong degree. Is that the immigration is a result of, like you said, U.S. U.S. and European imperialism. And people are driven out of their countries because they're destabilized and degraded, in some cases for centuries. That's true. And they want to flee to where, some people, it's a small percentage. I think it's fascinating because I kibitz with assholes all the time on Breitbart. And I was kibitzing with this guy, and he said, I said something nice about Vietnam, and he said, all the Vietnamese want to come to America. Well, I pointed out to him there's only 1.6 million Vietnamese in America, and there's 98 million Vietnamese still living in fucking Vietnam. So what the fuck are you talking about, you fucking dick asshole? He doesn't know that. He's an idiot, and Americans are idiots. I don't know about the Australians, but what I can tell from my experience with the Vietnam War, they're idiots too. So my point would be, you can talk all this stuff all you want, but to go outside, to rapidly go outside the capacity for understanding or appreciating it, the public, the so-called working people that you want to bring in, I'll tell you the first two people they want to kill when they get into power, Jews and communists. So two of the people on this panel are dead. You're dead if the fascists take over in Europe. So fine, if the fascists take over here, all you have to do is read Bannon's screeds or watch Bannon's screeds or listen to Bannon's screeds, Steve Bannon's screeds, and you'll hear it. You'll hear the rhetoric of the Hitlerian rise to power. We can talk all we want at this level. I understand it. Everybody on this panel understands it. But the working class, the so-called working class you're talking about, they don't have a clue what you're talking about. And they don't have a clue that millions of dollars are going in to stage these demonstrations by far-right elements in Europe. Elements that are directly linked with Nazism. They're not, it's not hard to, I found 8 pages just spending a couple of days doing research. I can't even cover it all.
So, yeah, I think there's two things. You're making 2 points, 2 different points. The first point is that we have a working class that is, really ignorant, which is true, right?
And anti-Semitic.
They don't understand, how imperialism works. But I don't think it's that big of a stretch to get them to grasp that the reason people from, in the United States, for instance, the reason people from South America and Central America want to come up here is because the United States has, impoverished their countries. I'm not sure that's a big stretch that we can't get people to appreciate and understand. And then you have another assertion is
there's that
basically
nationalism that they're so wrapped up in. A lot of people just don't want to hear, okay, my country is screwed up here or done this intentionally. Even maybe I've found that a lot when I have discussions with people on the right. It's like they really don't want to say, okay, well, yeah, okay, so the United States has been imperialistic. They don't want to do that. They'll sidestep it every which way.
It's a challenge. I mean, it's a challenge for sure. The other assertion Carla was making is, if Trump would have another term, or if Orban stays in Hungary, or if Le Pen comes to power in France, there's going to be, just extrajudicial executions of communists and Jews. So that's another assertion. I mean, in my opinion, I think that's a far-fetched, concern. I don't think that's a reality-based concern. But
well, if it's already happened, Billy Bob, it's already happening in the U.S.
Okay. Well, let's see what Jay. So I mean, those are the two issues that I heard you bring up, and I'm curious, how Jay would respond to them.
But there's already been an extrajudicial killing.
About 3 minutes to the commercial break. So
of Jews in this country, just because they can't identify the communists, and it makes them a little less prominent in the press. But the fact of the matter is, Jews and blacks and people of color have been slaughtered up and down the fucking 50 states. It's common knowledge by the hundreds, if not the thousands at this point, depending on how far back you want to go. I mean, and I don't know about
that's not with the far right in power, right?
What's that?
You can't blame Trump for that, right?
No, I don't blame Trump directly. Like I said in one of my things, if somebody goes and kills a bunch of children, and you go to their van and it's completely filled with Trump posters inside, Trump has some culpability. I did say that, and that is a fact. That has actually happened.
Well, our leaders should be more willing to stand up and say, look, enough is enough on these kind of issues, I think. And they don't. I mean, they kind of get lukewarm about it. And that's one of my concerns with Trump is, he didn't really make a pledge to end this kind of behavior or to say anything against it.
No,
I think
I didn't want to get on to Trump. He's a dick. Why waste our time?
I think the sentiment in Europe is different from that in America. Maybe in America they don't understand the relationship between immigration and imperialism, but I think in Europe they certainly do, especially as a consequence of the wars against the Middle East that we've seen over the past 10 years. Because Europe has been affected by the immigration crisis by an order of magnitude more than the United States, because there's a direct land connection. So that's what I'd say about that. As for the thing about Jews and communists, I mean, we should ask ourselves the question: why were Jews and communists targeted so much with the rise of fascism in the 1930s and the Second World War? I don't know how much more I'd be able to say if there's like a minute before another break. So maybe I'll leave that point later. But if you agree with what I was saying before about my analysis, if you say that it's all materially sound, then
Let me just say something here. The immigration issue was there before the Ukrainian, the inflation issue, long before. And that's where it got its roots. So that's the root cause, the root cause of these right-wing elements rising in Europe. So let's not put it all on this economic stuff. They were already there. And now they're exploiting this new thing.
So let's say 2013, 2014.
What's that?
That's when the immigration uptick really began in
Yeah, the Maidan.
2012, 2013.
Oh well.
No, I'm talking about the immigration. I'm not
I
talking
see.
about the Maidan. I'm not talking about
Right. Well,
Ukraine. I'm talking
the
about the wars in the
immigration
Middle
thing has
East.
been going on for 40 years now. So
Yeah, but
and that's
the
been
most
used.
recent uptick, there's been like a dramatic increase in immigration from as a consequence of the Arab Spring wars. That's what I'm pointing
I
to.
see what you're saying. But immigration has always been there. It's been the core reason these right wing elements have risen to power in Europe.
Take a brief break, but we'll be
Period.
right back for this discussion. Thanks for watching. America Open Market, AO Market. The best digital market for humanity is a free, multilingual, borderless market open to international sellers with various languages included. With America Open Market, you may start selling in minutes after filling out the form. Comprehensive dashboard where you understand your sales, orders, and customers is available. You get paid directly, securely, and instantly on the America Open Market. You can sell your house, car, electronic laptop, CD player, boombox, phone, headphones, furniture, and clothing, and anything on AmericaOpenMarket.com where all your sales and customer needs are met. Register as a merchant today. You will not regret becoming a vendor at America Open Market. For further inquiries, contact us at aomarket@gmail.com. AO Market, best digital marketplace for humanity. Welcome back to the Foreign Policy Review. We have Jay Tharappel with us today. So if I want to remind our viewers, if you have any questions, comments, leave them on the YouTube video, on Facebook. We'll get them on the show for you. So thanks for watching today. Let's continue with this discussion of immigration in Europe. And let's see where Carly was leaving off.
Well, I did all this research. Let me just when you get bored with this list, let me know. Philip, I can't read my own writing. De Winter speaks to the neo-Nazi party, the Golden Dawn. He's in the Flemish Parliament. Far-right Sweden. Far-right parties in Sweden, Denmark, Germany, and France now have members in the parliament. Cabinet members of the far right now exist in Norway, Finland, Poland, Czech Republic, Slovakia, Austria, Hungary, Bulgaria, and Greece. Of course, Italy. You have the brother. What's his face? The prime minister has fled because he could see the writing on the wall. Giorgia Meloni, who is the leader of the Brothers of Italy, has the ear of the hierarchy in the Italian government. It goes on and on. Belgium. There's a strong Trumpist element in the Belgian parliament. Hungary, Orban, of course. Germany, and it goes on, and let's go on and on. What's this? Oh yeah. Well, anyway, that's Bannon. I won't go into that. I'll leave Bannon for later. But
So,
anyway,
yeah,
I got more.
Far-right elements in governments in Eastern Europe and Western Europe. I'm not sure that's something that anybody disagrees with, but Jay was gonna address some things before the break. So
Yeah.
I think Carlo, you said that the far right they hate Jews and communists, and I think once again it's important to look back at history at why. It's because of this idea that they had about the Soviet Union, which is that it was a Judeo-Bolshevik regime. But then the further question is, well, why did they hate the Soviet Union? And it goes back to what I was saying before. I mean, the Soviet Union was the great equalizer. The Soviet Union's anti-imperialist message of solidarity with colonized nations was associated by a lot of these European countries, including the ones that already had colonies like France and Britain, but also the ones that were aspiring to have colonies of their own. They hated the Soviet Union for that reason, and therefore they kind of translated that to hatred of Jews, and they saw Jews as being overrepresented within the ranks of the Soviet leadership. Now, what's happened after the Second World War is that a sizable percentage of the European Jewish population have, become the core of the state of Israel. Now, Israel, in a sense, represents a defection of a sizable portion of the European Jewish population to the side of European empire building, because they too have now conquered a piece of territory in the Middle East. It's not a very large piece, but it's enough for their population, and they obviously want to expel the indigenous Palestinian population. But this also means that they feel extremely uncomfortable about the surrounding nations like Syria, Iraq, and they feel uncomfortable about Iran as well, because Iran supports the resistance against their occupation and their regime. And so, because of this feeling of insecurity, Israel, teaming up with other countries as well, so it's not just Israel, I'm not one of those people, but they've joined a predatory alliance of Turkey, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, the United States over the past decade to destabilize the Middle East. And the end result is that there's been an influx of immigrants from these countries into Europe. So if you look at what happened in Libya, when they took out the government of the late Colonel Muammar Gaddafi, Shahid Muammar Gaddafi, the martyr, which is what the word Shahid means, they took out a country that had immense clout and influence all across the African continent. Like, the reason why Africa had its own telecommunication satellites that allowed them to escape the domination and the monopolies of European telecommunications companies was because Muammar Gaddafi put up the money, put up like $400 million so that Africa could have its own capabilities. Libya was a pillar of the Pan-African economy. And so Europe went in and smashed that. And let's not forget the reason why NATO went in for that invasion. There was a WikiLeaks cable, and it was by Sidney Blumenthal, and he sent this cable to Hillary Clinton. And that cable basically said, look, the reason why the French want to take out Gaddafi is because he wants to introduce a gold currency called the gold dinar. And this gold currency poses a competitive challenge to the CFA franc. The CFA franc is a system of currency dominance that France continues to have over many African countries. And the deal is very simple. Countries in Africa get to they have a currency that has a stable relationship with the euro, essentially. But in exchange for that stability, that exchange rate stability that they do enjoy, they have to park 50% of their foreign exchange reserves in France, right? So France gets to use their export earnings in order to back their own living standards, in order to back the value of their own currency and the value of the euro. And in exchange, these countries have exchange rate stability, but they have a very fixed monetary system. They can't do, for example, stimulus. They can't use their monetary system to develop their own economy in an autonomous way. That's an entire discussion. It's economically difficult. But the point is that when they took out Muammar Gaddafi, that was the intention. They said, we have to take out Muammar Gaddafi, and this WikiLeaks cable demonstrates that was one of the motivations. Sarkozy was worried about the competitive challenge to the CFA franc. Now, the end result of that is that a lot of African countries ended up being weakened as a result, because Libya was very, very important to their economies. And so, as a result, there was a lot more immigration into Europe from Africa because they took out Muammar Gaddafi. Quite frankly, this is well understood in Europe. So it may not be understood in America, but it's well understood in Europe. The Gilets jaunes protest, the yellow vest protests, which were also accused, if you remember, of being associated with Vladimir Putin, backed by Russia, of being far right and racist. If you look at their points, because they had I think 14 points or something, they did talk about ending the system of the CFA franc, which they basically said, they quite explicitly said, I don't have the words exactly, but they said, this is a system of ongoing colonialism against the people of Africa. So it's not like they haven't drawn the connections themselves. They certainly have. And then, of course, that's taking out Libya. The other part of it is taking out Syria and the destabilization of other countries in the Middle East. And yeah, I mean, a lot of far right countries blame Israel for that. But I think they should be blaming Israel. They should be blaming their own governments. They should also be blaming the broader predatory coalition. They do blame Turkey, that's for sure.
Well,
But they don't blame Russia because they see Russia as a stabilizing force.
I agree with everything you said. It's inspiring to hear that Europeans can make this connection, but I have to agree with Dustin. Ultimately, I mean, as far as Israel goes, and say this country, for example, you got to consider Megiddo because this is a Christian country, and you got to consider that the alliance between the far right in this country is a religious one. It's Judeo-Christian. That's what Bannon will tell you over and over again. He wants to make a Judeo-Christian country, and his alliance with Judaism is very tenuous. It's based on the end times. And this is literal. You might think this is fanciful, but this is literally what they believe. And I have a good example of that. I can no longer mow my own lawn, so I have a guy do it for me, and he's from Central America, and I won't specify the country because I don't want to think anything to jeopardize. He's a great guy, but he's also whenever I go to pay him, he points out he's going to church on Sunday, an evangelical church, not a Catholic church. He's very specific about that. I know he wants. It would be a great coup. He thinks in his mind to get a white guy like me to go to his church. That would be great, But he's a hard worker. He's made great strides in his business, and all of that. But he believes in the end times. He believes in this Christian belief. Now, I didn't want to focus that much on it because I forgot my other point. But the fact of the matter is, there isn't any base in this country that would understand. Still, I have to insist, understand what you're talking about. It's more what Dustin was talking about. They don't want to hear about it. Oh, that's right. And this is the loop. This is the loop that now Europe is going to face. And that is when they, and especially here with MAGA and that crap, is that this reindustrialization, this once again becoming an industrial power, that can't happen without the old style imperialism in the U.S. And Trump knows that, and Bannon knows that, and everybody who's anybody in a position of power knows that. So even if MAGA became the dream that it wants to be, and every immigrant in this country was thrown out, exiled, well, that would be an utter disaster. If U.S. foreign policy ceased all of its wars, that would be an utter disaster for the American economy. And I would imagine that would be an utter disaster for Europe's economies. So that's the end game in all of this. You can't end that imperialism and have any lights on in Europe or any cars running in the United States. It won't happen. It's utterly based on exploitation, and the exploitation has to remain. So, in a certain sense, in a very, very ugly sense, the fascists are right in the sense that they want to get rid of the immigrants, but they're wrong in the sense they can like Rand Paul here, that you can do it without imperialist wars. You can't. They'd have to end up living like me. I don't think they want to do that. I've questioned. They don't. They don't even want to be associated with me, somebody that lives like me, because I live on a shoestring. They're stupid people. They wouldn't know what you were talking about. They don't have the vaguest idea what you were talking about. Not the vaguest, and they wouldn't care.
So, Jay, what do you think would happen if the U.S. kind of changed their approach to, the planet and ended the, 1,000 military installations around the globe and decided that, hey, we're not gonna we're not going to try and exploit every single resource in the third world. How could we adjust? I mean, I think we'd have to do something kind of like China's doing, and just in win-win trade and peace through mutual prosperity. That kind of approach, I think, would keep the lights on. But what are your thoughts on what Carlos said?
Carlo said that reindustrialization can't happen without imperialism, and this is where I disagree. I mean, I've written a PhD thesis on this, which recently passed actually, so I'm on the way to being a doctor. Let's look at this. Let's really unpack this, because part of the price that the United States pays for having the world's hegemonic currency is deindustrialization. Because if you have a currency with which you can import goods from all over the world, all that has to happen is that the Federal Reserve prints a piece of paper called the US dollar, and countries around the world are willing to hold that piece of paper and trade that piece of paper for like physical goods and services, then you're going to have an influx of goods from the rest of the world. And what's happened is that since 1971, that influx of goods has competed with America's own industrial base and America's own industrial production. And as a result, the United States has deindustrialized. Now let's ask a further question, which is, you said reindustrialization can't happen without imperialism. My argument is that the economic expression of US imperialism is US dollar hegemony, because the only way that US dollar hegemony could have been maintained, from what it was in the 1940s and 50s, when it was really benefiting the United States, was if the rest of the world remained poor forever, like indefinitely. But that didn't happen. For the reasons that I mentioned before. I mean, the Soviet Union after the Second World War was greatly beneficial to the third world. So third world countries got technology transfer from the Soviet Union, and just simple trade with the Soviet Union helped third world countries develop somewhat after the Second World War. And then after 1971, the United States could no longer maintain the gold standard, and that was because of Vietnam War expenditures. The US was printing so much money, which was a gold liability up until 1971, and they couldn't meet those gold obligations to France, incidentally, because what happened is that Charles de Gaulle basically sent a ship to the United States and said, give us our gold, we'll give you our pieces of paper called US dollars. And then that's when America said, we don't have enough gold. And then temporarily, according to Nixon, ended the convertibility of the US dollar to gold. And so after 1971, the US had to find new pillars to back the value of its currency, which is why it had to, in a sense, consent to the industrial rise of a country like China. So what that was about was the United States saying to China, look, we will allow our companies to do business with you. You will get technology transfer from our companies. And in exchange, you have to devote your gigantic labor force towards producing in exchange for the US dollar. And that's what's been keeping inflation down for a very long time. It's Chinese labor. It's the willingness of the Chinese workforce under the leadership of the Communist Party to produce gigantic quantities of goods in exchange for US dollars. Now, over time, what's happened is that China has industrialized to a level not maybe perceived by the United States or appreciated by the United States in the early 1970s. This is the argument that John Mearsheimer makes, which is the argument that the US should have started to contain the industrial rise of China maybe 10, 15 years ago instead of letting it continue. Because I think from the people who originally, like from the Nixon era, the thinking was that China was only going to produce, low-end manufactured goods. They were going to produce, the T-shirts and the shoes and things like that. They were not going to produce high-end value-added manufacturing goods. That was still going to be produced by North America and Europe, right? But over time, I mean, the thing is, once a country is politically sovereign, and China has fought for its sovereignty, right? I mean, lost millions of people doing so over the course of the 20th century, and before that as well. Once a country has sovereignty and it's able to industrialize, you can't really do anything unless you use military force. And now they're trying to use military force against China, but China is extremely powerful militarily. I mean, they're on the verge of reaching technological parity with the United States, and so the end result is that the U.S. keeps printing all of these dollars, but those dollars are coinciding with the deindustrialization of the country. So I think that the U.S. has gotten to the stage where you can actually make the argument to the American working class that if they were to give up U.S. dollar hegemony, which is the economic expression of U.S. imperialism, then they could have a shot at reindustrialization. So I think it's the opposite of what Carlo is saying.
Good luck with that, Billy Bob.
Jay, I appreciate your analysis. If we're gonna succinctly restate the disagreement here, I mean, you're kind of saying that only through ending our imperial approach to everything on the planet can we have a chance to re-industrialize. And Carlos saying we can't re-industrialize unless we go back to old school imperialism, which I assume he means, invasions and outright invasions and propping up governments, but we already kind of do that.
Yeah,
so,
isn't that still ongoing?
Well, so what are you talking about then? So if you're saying, the only way we can re-industrialize is through imperialism, and imperialism is continuing, I'm not sure what you're saying. I agree with Jay. So Jay is saying
it comes down to resources.
Yeah,
that's just it. The U.S. doesn't have all the resources for contemporary industrialization. No country really does. Not even China.
Well, let's have a look at China. I mean, China is a country that has a much smaller per capita natural resource base than the United States. I've looked into this, maybe I can find it, but resources per capita. I had no, I can't. It's somewhere buried in my files. But what I found is that China's per capita natural resource wealth is something like $16,000 per person, whereas a country like Canada is like $600,000 per person. Australia is also $600,000 per person. The United States is a little bit lower, but not that much lower. It's like $200,000 per person. So I think if you have a look at the world map and you look at the resource-rich parts of the world, then it actually looks like you can actually divide the world into a few zones. I mean, you have Latin America and Central America. They have plenty of natural resources. North America, so if you include Canada with the United States, then again, you've got plenty of natural resources there. Russia has plenty of natural resources. China is winning through trade, and so they acquire natural resources through trade because they actually just work very, very hard. And of course, India is very rich in agricultural resources as well. I don't see why a multipolar world in which we sort out our differences through trade is not possible. I think it's very possible, and I think to the argument that America can't reindustrialize without going out and with a battering ram, smashing other countries, subjugating them so that they're weak and impoverished and so that you can have their resources for cheap. I think that the example of China just speaks to why that's not the case. China within its own borders does not have a lot of resources per capita. The reason why China is able to lift hundreds of millions of people out of poverty, which is just an immense achievement, under the leadership of a communist party, and I think that's very important to mention to the American people. The reason why they've been able to do that is because they discipline their own ruling class. They discipline their own financial capitalist class as well. And the way they do that is very simple. You know, they don't just talk about labor discipline in China; they talk about capital discipline as well. And so, you know, they ensure that their banking system lends credit to the areas that are going to be the most productive. You know, whereas I'll give you an example, right? Like here in Australia, we run our mining at a loss. Sorry, we run our mining at a profit. In China, they run it at a loss. Okay. And the reason they run mining at a loss is because that is the material premise for the rest of the economy. And what happens is that the People's Bank of China will simply capitalize the mining companies, run them at a loss, and then just keep recapitalizing them with money that they just print out of thin air. But that's fine so long as the mines are materially productive in the sense that they churn out the raw materials that eventually make a company like Huawei productive, right? And it's because they run those mines at a loss that China, at the end of the day, is able to move towards they're rapidly catching up in terms of semiconductor manufacturing, which is why Taiwan is so important, right? I mean, that's what it's coming down to. So learn how to discipline your own capitalist class the way that China does is the lesson from China if you want to improve the lives and standard of living of your people. China now has overtaken the United States in terms of life expectancy. So you can now say that objectively China, that the average Chinese person has a better standard of living than the average American, right? Simply based on life expectancy. I think you would have been able to make that argument 10, 15 years ago, because I think, you know, if you look at like Chinese people under the age of 20, they certainly have better diets than the average American under the age of 20, you know, who eats garbage, unfortunately.
Once
So
again,
I just don't buy that argument. I don't buy the argument that you need to go out and smash the rest of the world in order to reindustrialize.
well,
It's
I'm
just
not saying that. I agree with everything you said. I'm just saying it's not happening here. It's not. There's not even a glimmer of it happening here. As a matter of fact, it's going in the opposite direction. It's going toward a Fourth Reich here. It's not going toward this sane, obviously sane Chinese approach to things. It's going the opposite way. I don't. We can talk all we want about this ideal situation, supposedly, but I tell you, if you come out to Washington D.C. here, and we'll get a microphone and a camera, we'll go out on the street and we'll talk to people, and you can say, what do you think about adopting the Chinese model here in the United States? And I guarantee you're not going to get a very pleasant response. And we could do anything. We could go to Bethesda Chevy Chase and talk to the people that are the foot soldiers for the imperialists, or we could come to my neighborhood and we could talk to the immigrants and the African Americans and the Central Americans. And you're not going to get any consensus on that. But I mean that's kind of apocryphal. I don't even need to. I really probably shouldn't even couch it in those terms. But I don't get the connection to like saying, look, this exists here, it would work there, when there's no sign that there's even a glimmer of it beginning to operate here. Certainly the Rand Pauls of the world don't mean what you're talking about. They don't have that. Certainly the Trumps don't. The Trumps of the world, they see communists, and they see ultimately Jews, and this would go for his son-in-law, as objects that they ultimately would like to dispense with, to kill, basically.
So we have about 2 minutes left. I wanted to ask Jay,
I'm getting on my soapbox a little bit here, but I'm
Right.
talking about what's actually happening around me, not these theoretical notions.
Well, I wanted to ask Jay, what books would you suggest if we wanted to read more about some of the topics we've discussed today?
Well, I mean, if you want my exact argument, then you'd have to read my PhD thesis, but which will be uploaded on my Sydney University database soon, which means that it's going to be publicly available soon as well. As for books, I mean, like the argument that I made isn't one that you can find in a single book. Like it's one that I've researched by looking at various sources, right? But to pick up on one thing in particular, you mentioned Rand Paul. I mean, Rand Paul has been a big critic of the fact that America has printed so much money over the past 2 years. Something like 80% of all the US dollars printed, like ever, have been printed in the past 2 years, right? That is an attempt at currency hegemony that is just waning and failing. And now the inflationary tidal wave is coming home. I think the area where libertarians, simply will fail is on the economic question, because they do not have the grasp of the need to discipline their own capitalist class, and that's where I think that, I mean, you say that people hate China and they don't want to be like China. Well, yeah, I mean, that's why you have to talk to them. That's why you have to win them over. Once you have the correct material analysis, then it's simply about conveying that to the population. And one last point, I mean, I hope I can squeeze this in before the commercial break, but I remember seeing a video of of a MAGA Republican supporter. It was a woman who was being interviewed, and she was asked the question, who would you prefer as president, Joe Biden or Vladimir Putin? And she said something like, I think Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping are leading the fight against the New World Order or the deep state or something like that. And it was something like, it doesn't really matter whether what she was saying was accurate, right? But the fact that she was able to find some kind of point of affinity and symbolic solidarity with Xi Jinping, I think speaks to the possibility of actually winning people over on the United States adopting a lot of the same policies as China and learning from China as a great historical civilization.
But you have no context in which she understood Putin or Xi Jinping.
Doesn't matter.
She may go, well, Putin's an anti-Semite, and that really appeals to me.
Well, we've reached the end of the hour
through the media.
So we've reached the end of the hour. This has been the Foreign Policy Review. Thanks to our viewers today. Subscribe to our channel, and thanks to Jay for being on the show today, and thanks to Billy, Bob, and Carlo for co-hosting. And hopefully we'll be back next week. I'm sure we will, with another fascinating guest in the discussion. So be prepared to watch. Thanks for viewing today. Subscribe to the channel. Thank you. World Inkers Monthly Magazine is a fine source for your literary interests. It's an all-source magazine with poetry, prose, and essays and articles, as well as interviews. It's all full-color art and photography from a variety of voices and artists. You will find this magazine entertaining. This is an all-purpose readership, and we are looking for new voices. This sleek, full-color edition of World Inkers Monthly Magazine will be something pleasant for your eyes as well as for your mind. And we're looking for authors for one book promotion in the magazine. If you're a business, we want to promote your business. You may submit your book reviews, your academic or non-academic articles on the humanities and the arts, as well as your literary writing and creative output, to publication.worldinkers@gmail.com. World Inkers Monthly Magazine does not spare any ink. Keep inking for World Inkers Monthly Magazine.